Below is your curt FULE rewrite. Part 1. With all 5 realism fixes applied. Realistic power system. Streetlights plub house load, not whole grid. Deeper Darlene motive. Desperate, hiding financial collapse. Legal correction, emergency easement, not property seizure. Sharper, realistic dialogue. Logical technical setup for later blackout. Logical technical setup for later blackout. Tone remains high tension, cinematic, HOA 1 style, first person, emotionally gripping. The pounding started before sunrise, not knocking, pounding. Boots on gravel, metal clanging. Engines idling low and heavy like something mechanical breathing in the dark. I stepped outside, heart racing, and stopped cold. 3 trucks, contractors, security. Survey markers already stabbed into my lawn like warning flags. And in the center of my yard stood Darlene Whitmore, perfect posture. Clipboard in hand. Calm, too calm, too calm. Begin, she said. A trenching machine rolled forward. Stomp. My voice came out sharper than I expected. I stepped between the machine and the grass. Darlene, show me the easement grant. You don't have a signature on file, and we both know it. Some of the workers hesitated. She didn't. Pursuant to Bylaw 4.2, she said evenly, the HOA is exercising emergency access easement rights due to critical infrastructure needs. My stomach tightened. Emergency easement, not ownership. Not yet, but a legal wedge, the kind that grows if left unchallenged. You can't force access without notice, I said. If that excavator touches the ground, I'm calling the police for criminal trespass. For a moment, silence hung between us. Then something shifted. Behind me, a metallic snap. I turned. One of the contractors had opened the utility junction box at the edge of my property. Thick cables ran through it, heavier than residential lines, industrial load, not grid power. High load routing, clubhouse systems, streetlights, community infrastructure. They weren't taking my land, they were stealing my meter. And suddenly, the whole situation made sense. The pressure, the urgency, the quiet push over the past months. This wasn't expansion. This was desperation. I looked back at Darlene, really looked this time. For the first time, the mask slipped. She looked tired. Tight around the eyes, like someone holding together something already collapsing. And in that moment, I understood something far bigger than a property dispute. If I stopped this, their entire hidden system would be exposed. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Update and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? A few months earlier, none of this felt possible. When I first bought the house, the corner lot was the reason. Slightly larger than the others, open on 2 sides, quiet, and bordered by a narrow underground utility easement that the paperwork described as standard shared access for maintenance. At the time, it sounded harmless, technical language buried inside closing documents. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening. Just another legal detail in a long stack of signatures. The neighborhood itself felt calm, almost perfectly ordered. Lawns trimmed evenly, sidewalks clean. Even the evenings were quiet. Porch lights glowing softly while neighbors walked dogs or waved politely across the street. It was the kind of place where life seemed predictable in a comforting way. Structured, peaceful, safe, and yes, controlled. The HOA rules were strict, but nothing I couldn't handle. Lawn height, fence alignment, exterior paint approval. Follow the guidelines, keep things tidy, and everything stayed smooth. I had no intention of fighting anyone. I wanted quiet, stability. Stability. Home. That was when I first met Darlene Whitmore. She introduced herself personally within days of my move-in. Confident handshake, warm smile, perfectly measured tone. Publicly, she was everything you'd expect from a community leader. Organized, friendly. Efficient, she welcomed me, complimented the property, and spoke about long-term improvements for the neighborhood. At the time, I saw dedication. Now, I recognize control. The first notice came 2 weeks later. Polite, almost trivial. Grass height slightly above recommended length. I trimmed it the same afternoon. No issue. Then another. Fence alignment deviation by less than an inch. Then a clarification about easement access guidelines. Small things. Technical things. Nothing dramatic, but they came consistently, like someone mapping boundaries. At first, I assumed it was routine enforcement. Then I began noticing the way neighbors spoke, quietly, cautiously, never directly. One evening, while watering the yard, a neighbor across the street lowered his voice and said, "Darlene's been tightening authority, little by little." Then he walked away before I could ask more. I didn't understand what he meant. Not yet. Months later, the first real warning appeared. Surveyors. They showed up without notice, placing small colored flags along the edge of my property near the easement. When I approached, they gave vague answers. Routine measurement, community planning, nothing specific. They packed quickly, avoiding eye contact. Something about their urgency felt wrong. I contacted the HOA office. Darlene responded casually, said the board was exploring a sustainability initiative involving upgraded streetlights and improved community energy efficiency. Nothing finalized. Nothing to worry about, but the flags remained in my memory. Over time, small details began connecting. Conversations overheard. Documents posted. References to a community center modernization project. The clubhouse was being upgraded. New, high-capacity HVAC, extended lighting, expanded electrical demand. Expensive systems, commercial-level usage. Yet HOA fees hadn't increased. That didn't make sense. Then came the first moment of real doubt. While reviewing my purchase paperwork again, I noticed the easement description, limited to maintenance access, not infrastructure expansion. No permanent load routing, no commercial usage clause. Which meant if power was being redirected through my easement, it required written consent, my consent. And no one had ever asked. Life stayed quiet on the surface, but the tone changed underneath. Darlene grew more distant, less friendly, more formal. Notices became colder. Conversation shorter. And every now and then, I caught her watching the easement line at the edge of my property, measuring something only she understood. Then, one afternoon, the letter arrived. Official. Legal. Precise. I opened it slowly, already sensing the shift before I finished reading. Pursuant to Bylaw 42, the HOA is exercising emergency access easement rights due to critical infrastructure requirements. My hands tightened around the paper. They weren't asking. They were claiming they already had the right. I didn't wait. I walked straight into the HOA office with the letter still in my hand, the words, "Emergency Access Easement," echoing louder the longer I thought about them. Not ownership, not yet. But a legal wedge, the kind that grows stronger the longer it goes unchallenged. Darlene Whitmore was already there, seated behind her desk, composed as ever. Papers aligned perfectly, pen placed parallel to the folder. Control in every detail. "I assume you received the notice," she said calmly. I placed the letter in front of her. "Show me the signed easement expansion." "You don't have one." Her eyes flicked to the paper, then back to me. "The board has authorized temporary access due to critical infrastructure demand. All procedures were followed. You never notified me." "All required communications were issued," she replied in the same even tone. "Your refusal to cooperate is now delaying essential community systems." There it was again, not a request, not a negotiation. A narrative. They weren't taking land, they were framing MEC as obstruction. The fines started the following week. First, a notice labeled "Interference with Authorized Utility Access." Then another tie. failure to comply with emergency easement directive. Each carried escalating penalties. Not outrageous individually, but deliberate, structured building pressure. I emailed, called, requested documentation. Every response was the same: procedural language, no answers. Then the contractors came. I returned home one afternoon to find 2 trucks parked along the edge of my property. Workers stood near the easement markers, holding updated routing diagrams. One had already stepped beyond my property line. "Stop right there," I called. "We're authorized under HOA directive," the supervisor replied, not looking at me. "Not without a signed easement," I said. "Step off the property." They hesitated, not confident, just following orders. After a long pause, they withdrew, but the message was clear: they intended to return. That night, I began reviewing HOA meeting archives, everything publicly available. Buried inside the monthly minutes, I found the session where the emergency easement access had supposedly been approved. Something didn't match. Attendance numbers inconsistent with prior meetings, voting record formatting slightly altered. Signatures scanned, not handwritten. The approval existed, but it felt constructed, not recorded. Not obvious, but wrong. Word began spreading quietly. Some neighbors approached cautiously, offering fragments of information. Vague pressure to sign infrastructure consent, forms, unexplained warnings, subtle intimidation. Others stayed silent, avoiding eye contact entirely. Fear of becoming the next target was stronger than solidarity. The pressure increased. Fines doubled, then tripled. Legal wording hardened. Letters began referencing lien review if penalties remained unresolved. Not immediate, but looming. Structured, predictable, calculated. Then came the real discovery. Late one night, unable to sleep, I opened the utility junction panel near the easement. The cover had fresh tool marks. Inside, the routing was different. Additional load lines had been installed, heavier, commercial grade. Not full grid power, but high load systems. Clubhouse HVAC routing. Streetlight feed distribution. Bypassed commercial meter. They weren't taking my land. They were running their operating costs through my residential line. Which meant one thing: if exposed, their entire system would collapse, financially, legally, operationally. The next morning, a certified letter arrived, not emotional, not threatening, clinical, from the HOA legal office. One sentence stood out: failure to comply with emergency easement access will result in enforcement action, including lien placement and property recovery proceedings as permitted under association bylaws. After the lawyer's letter, everything changed. Before, it had felt like pressure, structured, calculated, contained within paperwork. Now it felt like escalation. Not louder, not dramatic. Just closer, more persistent. Like something tightening one turn at a time. Inspections began without notice. Morning, evening. Sometimes both in the same day. Clipboards, cameras, measuring tools. They walked the easement line, photographed junction covers, documented access obstruction, and left without discussion. Every visit ended the same way. Another notice, another fine, another reminder that I was non-compliant. The numbers climbed steadily. Manageable became uncomfortable. Uncomfortable became suffocating. Sleep thinned into fragments. Nights filled with calculations, deadlines, penalties, worst-case outcomes. Not panic, just pressure. Then the intimidation visits started. 2 board representatives arrived one evening without paperwork. No clipboards, no cameras. Just quiet conversation at the edge of the driveway. "You're making this more difficult than necessary," one of them said calmly. "The board has obligations to the community. Resistance only increases consequences, not a threat." A warning wrapped in procedure. I didn't respond. Days later, I came home to the sound of machinery. A narrow trench had already been cut along the outer edge of the easement, shallow, deliberate, unmistakable. Fresh soil piled along the grass like a line drawn in advance. "Shut it down," I said sharply, stepping forward. The operator stopped. The supervisor held up a printed directive labeled Preliminary Access Authorization. "You don't have a signed expansion," I replied. "Backfill it." For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, they powered down. The trench remained, small but symbolic. They weren't asking anymore. They were testing limits. That night, the lights flickered. Not a full outage. Just a dip. Brief, controlled. Then again. Subtle but unnatural. No storm. No breaker trip. No neighborhood outage reported. The next evening, it happened again. Longer. Something in the system wasn't stable. The following HOA meeting pushed everything further. I attended with documentation, prepared to challenge the easement claim publicly. The room was full. Residents quiet, watchful. Darlene stood at the front, composed, professional, in complete command of tone and pacing. When I presented my objection, lack of signed easement expansion, unauthorized routing concerns, she listened calmly. Then she reframed the narrative. "While we respect individual property rights," she said evenly, "community infrastructure must function without obstruction. Delays have increased operating costs significantly." Operating costs. The room shifted slightly. She didn't accuse. She didn't raise her voice. She simply positioned me as the reason things were becoming expensive. A subtle shift, but powerful. And then I saw it. For the first time, up close, the strain beneath her control. A brief hesitation. A tightness around the eyes. Not fear. Not weakness. Pressure. Like someone trying to hold together something already slipping. The meeting moved forward. Motions. Votes. Procedure. My objection recorded, but contained. Managed. Controlled. By the time it ended, the narrative had changed again. Not land theft. Not unauthorized routing. Operational necessity. That night, sleep didn't come at all, and sometime after midnight I checked the junction panel again. The routing was clearer now. Not full grid, not neighborhood power. High-load systems only. Clubhouse, HVAC feed, primary streetlight circuit. Both tied into a bypass path through my residential easement, avoiding commercial metering, not expansion. Cost concealment. The next morning, another certified envelope arrived. Heavier. Final. A foreclosure review notice. Conditional, procedural, structured. Outstanding fines unresolved. Easement non-compliance recorded. Enforcement timeline initiated. Deadline approaching. The foreclosure notice didn't break me. For a few hours, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the page, listening to the faint electrical hum behind the walls. The same hum I had ignored for months, the same one now carrying a story I finally understood. Fear didn't disappear. But something else rose stronger than it. Clarity. Because there was something they didn't know about me. Before this house, before this neighborhood, I had spent years working in municipal infrastructure engineering and utility compliance. My job had been simple in theory, unforgiving in practice. Verify routing legality, enforce load regulations, ensure no one bypassed commercial metering or modified shared systems without authorization. I knew how infrastructure was supposed to work. I also knew how it failed and what happened when someone tried to hide that failure. And the moment I opened that junction panel days earlier, I recognized exactly what they had done. They weren't routing the whole grid. That would have been impossible. They were bypassing the commercial meter for the community center, HVAC, and the primary streetlight circuit, feeding both through my residential easement to avoid commercial rate billing. A quiet diversion. Technically hidden, financially massive, and illegal. If exposed, it wasn't just a civil violation. It was a compliance breach with financial implications, unreported infrastructure modification, unauthorized load routing, and possible falsification of operating records. The kind of violation that triggered investigations, audits, and forced correction, which explained everything: the pressure, the urgency, the need to secure my easement at any cost. They weren't expanding, they were covering a deficit. I began gathering everything, not emotionally, not reactively, but methodically. Property deeds, easement language, HOA notices, fine records, then infrastructure diagrams, utility filings, load routing maps. I compared approved layouts against the current configuration I had documented at the junction. The difference was clear. The HVAC and streetlight loads had been rerouted without updated permit authorization. No commercial meter reporting, no regulatory amendment, which meant if verified, the system could be forced offline until corrected, not revenge. Compliance, and compliance had rules. By midnight, I had mapped the full routing chain. The load entering my junction fed outward into the streetlight distribution loop and partially into the clubhouse mechanical system. Not the whole neighborhood, but critical enough to matter, disrupt it, and the illusion of efficient operation would collapse instantly. I leaned back, exhaustion mixing with something sharper: resolve. For months, they had pushed carefully: fines, pressure, legal framing, assuming I would comply before I understood. They believed control came from authority. But control comes from knowledge, and now I had it. I organized everything: diagrams, photos, documentation, preparing not for confrontation, but for verification. One clause in the compliance code stood out: unauthorized infrastructure affecting shared safety systems could trigger a mandatory regulatory review and temporary shutdown until corrected. Rare, powerful, lawful. I stood near the window, looking out at the quiet street, streetlights glowing evenly, clubhouse systems humming somewhere in the distance. Everything appeared normal, stable, controlled. But beneath the ground, the routing told a different story, one dependent on a single junction. My junction. And for the first time since this began, I spoke the truth aloud, not in anger, not in fear, but in certainty. They built their entire system on my easement, and that means I control the switch. Once I understood the system, fear stopped driving my decisions. Precision took over. This was no longer a dispute, it was documentation. I began quietly, choosing hours when no one watched. Early mornings before sunrise. Late nights when the neighborhood went still. Each time, I opened the junction panel and recorded everything carefully: routing paths, cable gauges, connection points, installation markings. I mapped the flow outward, one line feeding the clubhouse mechanical system, another feeding the primary streetlight loop running across the main roads. Both tied through my easement before reaching their distribution branches. Not illegal by existence, illegal by authorization. There was no updated permit, no commercial meter registration, no lawful expansion of easement terms. Once the evidence was complete, I moved to verification. I submitted a formal infrastructure safety inquiry to the county inspector's office, not an accusation, just a compliance concern supported by documentation. The wording was deliberate, technical, neutral. At the same time, I forwarded routing photos and load mapping to the regional utility compliance regulator, requesting confirmation of authorized configuration. Then I waited. Days passed quietly above ground, but tension grew underneath. Twice more, the lights flickered, not full outages, just brief instability in the load distribution. The system was functional, but strained. Improvised routing rarely remains invisible forever. To secure undeniable proof of interference, I installed discrete cameras overlooking the junction access point. Not obvious, not intrusive. Silent observers. 3 nights later, They captured exactly what I needed. Two figures approached the panel after dark, one unmistakable, the operations coordinator reporting directly to Darlene. They opened the junction, adjusted routing, resealed it. No inspection permit. No utility supervision. Unauthorized modification. I archived the footage without reaction. Meanwhile, something else began shifting. Neighbors started speaking, quietly, cautiously. A few had received vague requests to sign infrastructure acknowledgement forms months earlier. Others mentioned sudden increases in HOA spending tied to the clubhouse renovation and new lighting installation. No one had proof, just suspicion. Now, with questions surfacing, several agreed to document what they had seen. Not public testimony yet, but enough to establish pattern and timeline. The picture was complete, but pressure didn't stop. Darlene made her move soon after. A formal notice circulated to all residents announcing a safe final vote, permanent recognition of emergency easement access over my property, framed as necessary for community infrastructure continuity. Once passed, the temporary claim would gain legal strength through continued use, a prescriptive foothold. The meeting was scheduled for the end of the week. Public. The D. Binding. Final. They believed they were securing control. They had no idea they were walking into verification. I prepared the last piece, a formal compliance notice draft supported by routing documentation, footage timestamps, and easement terms. It wouldn't shut anything down automatically. But if confirmed during official review, regulatory protocol required temporary disconnection of unauthorized load routing until corrected. Procedure. Not retaliation. By the night before the meeting, everything was ready. Documentation compiled. Evidence secured. Inquiry acknowledged by inspectors. Utility regulator notified. Nothing dramatic, just systems aligning with fact. I stepped outside briefly, looking across the quiet street. Streetlights glowing evenly. Houses calm. Everything appearing normal. But beneath the ground, the system was fragile, dependent on a connection never meant to carry what it now carried. And tomorrow, that connection would be questioned. Inside the meeting hall, they would arrive confident, prepared to formalize control. They believed the outcome was inevitable. But for the first time since this began, I wasn't afraid of that room. Because tomorrow both sides would walk in ready, and only one would walk out with the truth. The meeting hall was already full when I arrived. Every chair taken. People standing along the walls. Low whispers moving through the room like static before a storm. Neighbors who once waved casually across lawns now sat stiff, uncertain, watching. Some avoided my eyes. Others studied me carefully, as if trying to decide whether I had come defeated or prepared. At the front, Darlene Whitmore stood behind the long board table, posture straight, expression composed. Documents stacked neatly, agenda printed. Motions prepared. Control. Visible, structured, deliberate. But tonight something was different. Beneath the surface calm, there was strain. Subtle, almost invisible. A tightness in her jaw. A pause before turning pages. Not fear, pressure, like someone holding together numbers that refused to balance. I took my seat near the center, folder resting on my lap. Inside, routing diagrams, permit records, easement language, footage stills, compliance references, every piece positioned, every detail verified. Not emotion, evidence. The meeting opened formally. Attendance roll. Procedural language, routine approvals moving one by one. But no one was listening to the small items. Everyone knew why we were there. Then Darlene stood. As you are aware, she began smoothly, voice steady, the board has worked to maintain uninterrupted operation of critical community systems, including upgraded lighting and facility infrastructure. Unfortunately, continued resistance from one property owner has delayed necessary stabilization. A few murmurs moved through the room. She didn't look at me yet. Temporary emergency easement access was granted under Bylaw 4.2, she continued. Tonight, the board seeks to formalize that access to ensure long-term continuity and prevent further operational disruption. There it was. Not land seizure, not ownership. Prescriptive control through continued use. Across the room, I noticed movement near the back. The county infrastructure inspector had arrived quietly, taking a seat without announcement. Beside him, a representative from utility compliance. Observers, silent. Waiting. Darlene lifted a document from the table. This vote confirms permanent recognition of infrastructure routing across the designated easement, she said. All procedural requirements have been satisfied. She finally looked directly at me. Unless there is any final statement, she said calmly, confident, certain of outcome, we will proceed. For a moment, the room felt suspended. Breath held, tension thick. This was the point where pressure usually wins, where resistance fades, where control becomes permanent. I stood slowly. The chair scraped softly behind me. Dozens of eyes turned. The whispers stopped. Even Darlene's composure shifted, just slightly. I held the folder in my hand, feeling the weight of everything inside it. When I spoke, my voice was calm. Not loud, not angry, precise. Before you vote, I said, letting the silence carry the words, you should understand what happens when unauthorized load routing is verified under compliance review. The room held its breath. Darlene didn't interrupt this time. Her confidence remained, but thinner now, stretched. If you have documentation, she said evenly, you may present it. I stepped forward and placed the folder on the table. Let's begin with what was approved, I said, opening the first set of documents. These are the official utility filings for this community. Permitted routing, registered loads, and authorized meter distribution. Then I placed the second set beside them. And these reflect the current configuration. I pointed to a marked junction node. The clubhouse, HVAC, and primary streetlight circuit are being supplied through a bypass path connected to my residential easement. There is no registered commercial meter for this routing. No amended permit, no authorized easement expansion. Murmurs spread through the room. People leaned forward, whispering. Darlene spoke quickly. Those diagrams are misinterpreted. The board approved. I slid another page forward. This is the meeting record where that approval supposedly occurred. Attendance count, inconsistent. Signature format altered. It does not meet procedural validation. Her composure slipped, just for a second. Then I placed the printed stills from the camera footage. 3 nights ago, I said calmly, unauthorized personnel accessed the junction panel and modified routing without inspection clearance. A wave of tension moved through the room. Then a voice from the back spoke. The documentation is consistent. The county infrastructure inspector stepped forward, badge visible, expression firm. Silence fell instantly. We reviewed the submitted materials earlier today, he continued. The current routing configuration does not match registered infrastructure filings. The HVAC and streetlight load are connected through an unregistered bypass. Darlene stood abruptly. There must be a misunderstanding. There is not, the inspector replied. Unregistered load routing affecting public systems requires immediate correction. He turned toward the utility compliance representative, who nodded once. Then he reached for the control authorization. A firm, metallic CLU cunk echoed through the building. Outside the windows, the streetlights lining the roads flickered, then went dark all at once. The room fell into dim gloom, lit only by emergency exit signs. Gasps. Silence. Realization. The bypass had been feeding the streetlight circuit through my easement, and now it was disconnected. Darlene's face changed completely. Not composed. Not controlled. Exposed. The routing was installed under board authority, the inspector said calmly. A formal compliance investigation will begin immediately. 2 enforcement officers stepped forward. No resistance, no argument. Just the quiet collapse of control. Outside, utility crews began controlled correction, rerouting the streetlight circuit and separating the clubhouse load from the unauthorized bypass. Not under HOA direction, but under regulatory supervision. When the lights returned later, they felt different. Because the illusion had ended. The authority that once pressured, controlled, and concealed had been broken, not by force, but by verification. The darkness that night didn't just shut off the streetlights, it shut off the illusion. By the next morning, the investigation had already begun moving forward, and this time nothing was hidden behind procedure or polished language. The unauthorized routing wasn't speculation anymore. It was documented, verified, recorded in official filings. The truth came out quickly. The bypass hadn't been about efficiency, it had been about survival. The clubhouse renovation, the oversized HVAC system, the high-intensity streetlights, all of it had pushed the HOA far beyond its financial limits. Reserve funds were nearly gone, operating costs rising, and the fiscal audit was approaching. Routing those loads through my residential easement had concealed the real expense, buying time, hiding numbers, delaying collapse, and at the center of it all was Darlene Whitmore. When I saw her again during the compliance review, she looked nothing like the woman who once stood confidently in my yard. The control was gone. The certainty gone. Beneath the calm expression was exhaustion, the look of someone who had tried to outrun a mistake until there was nowhere left to run. She had not built the system out of power, but out of desperation. But desperation doesn't erase consequences. Within days, she was formally removed from her position pending legal proceedings tied to unauthorized infrastructure modification, falsified procedural records, and regulatory violations. Other board members who had supported the decision stepped down under review. Financial oversight was placed over the HOA, and a full audit began. The structure that once felt untouchable had collapsed quietly, not in chaos, but in exposure. Then something unexpected happened. The neighborhood changed. Without pressure, without quiet intimidation, people began speaking openly again. Neighbors who once stayed silent started stopping by, some hesitant, some direct. A few apologized for not questioning sooner. Others admitted they had sensed something was wrong, but hadn't known how deep it ran. What had once been tension slowly shifted into something stronger. Awareness, honesty, community. The HOA itself was rebuilt, this time transparent. Elections monitored, finances open. Decisions documented publicly. The same system that had once been used to control was reshaped to protect. And my land, my easement, was restored completely. The county confirmed there was no permanent access claim, no prescriptive right, no lawful expansion. The unauthorized routing was removed, and the streetlight and clubhouse systems were reconnected properly through approved commercial channels. My property title remained untouched, clear, intact, fully mine. The pressure that had once filled every day slowly faded. No more letters. No more inspections. No more footsteps near the junction at night. Just quiet. Weeks later, one early morning, I stepped outside as the first light of sunrise spread across the grass. The air was still, the street calm. The same peaceful place I had once hoped for, but now stronger, earned, because peace feels different when you fought to protect it. I stood there for a long moment, looking across the land that had nearly been taken, not with anger, not with triumph, but with clarity. This had never been about winning. It had been about refusing to surrender what was rightfully mine. The sun rose higher, warm light spreading across the ground beneath my feet. My land, my home, fully mine again, free, safe, finally at peace. If you want to hear more true stories like this, Make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Update and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?